Well, good morning here in Indiana. Anyway, it's morning. I'm Bob Kovac with Mobius Fender Partners, and I'm here with Bill Ryczek, who is a partner in Colebrook Financial. And full disclosure, I've known Bill Ryczek for, I don't know, a very, very long time, huh, Bill? And interestingly enough, we've had a few conversations, not many, but as we see each other at different conferences and conventions, we always reach out, seem to shake hands and smile and go on about our business. And every time I look at a timeshare, particularly publication, I see where Colebrook Financial is involved in another transaction. And so it's good to know that a company like Colebrook has been around as long as it has. We'll talk a little bit about the history, and I will just jump right out there and say good morning, Bill. You're in what, Connecticut, I think?
It's morning here in Connecticut as well, Bob. Good morning to you.
Technology is so wonderful. I just think it's the greatest. I mean,
Once we get it working, it's wonderful. Yes.
Once we get it working, and as an owner of a technology company, I can tell you that I don't know much about it. So, they don't let me do much as far as technology. This is about as good as it gets for me. So what I'm going to talk about with Bill is how to look at different ways of financing inside the resort industry, the general timeshare specifically. This will have some wide reaching, way past the vertical industry itself. So you want to pay attention to what Bill has to say. So having said that, Bill, you ready to jump into it? You want to say anything before we start?
I'll just say I've been doing this for a long time, but really the late 70s, and been to many ARTA conventions. And the finance panel was always, what the lenders look for, what should be in a finance package. If you're looking for a loan, what should you send? We did a lot of those. We were rotating. I think Bill Ward, maybe it was Ron Goldberg, and I were on the panel for years, and we'd rotate. One of us would be the moderator. But we would talk about these things in generic terms. And one thing that's happened in the last few years, you look at trends, Bob, and I know that's one of the things you do, is look at trends. And one thing we've seen recently is a tremendous proliferation of different timeshare product. We started back with, many years ago with single weeks, single unit. And now it's really vacation packages, because everybody wants to appeal to the millennial and what travel patterns are today. And what everyone seems to think millennials want is a lot of flexibility and not a lot of baggage. So we're seeing a trend toward more flexible usage, shorter term, and the ability to do different things, not go the same place but be able to do it without using one of the exchange companies and having lots of options. And we see people building these products, and they'll tell us about them. And here's what my product is. And it's always geared toward what the customer will like. And that's what you need to do, because if you don't have customers, you really don't have a business. But almost every developer needs to finance their receivables. And the question they have to ask, and I think where we can provide some input, is when you're structuring this product, what do you have to think about in order to make it financeable? And as a lender, there's one big thing that has to happen. And that's that the owner has to be able to use the product in the way they think they're going to be able to use it. Because I would say there are two reasons people don't pay their notes. One is because they can't. They lose their job, they get divorced, they have some financial hardship. The other is because they don't want to. And that's the one we really underwrite against. What reasons would people not want to pay their timeshare notes? And the main one is they can't use it, or they can't use it in the way they thought they were going to. And when you're selling a single week, a single unit, it's pretty clear what you're getting. If you're not free that week, it's kind of your own fault. And Bob, if you can hit the next slide, please.
I was going to just sort of back up on something that you said too, Bill, for just a second, and that is the fact that people are finding ways to use their vacation outside of the exchanges. But then as I look at the exchanges, they are also expanding their product lines considerably to accommodate.
There's everything. And you look at how the exchange company started, there were a bunch of single site resorts and you needed to exchange. Now with so many clubs and so many types of flexible usage, exchange companies have evolved to a different role, including rentals, including offering their own product, the interval gold, the RCI points. So the exchange companies are very different than they used to be because the whole industry is evolving. And you see those lists of products on the slide, and those are categories. There's a million different variations of those. But what it comes down to is people need to be able to use it. If you're financing any product, if you're financing washing machines, the person has to get a washing machine, clean clothes have to go in, or dirty clothes have to go in, and clean clothes have to come out. And if that doesn't happen, they're going to be unhappy and they may not pay. So the same thing with timeshare. They have to be able to use it. One is you have to have control over the property for the whole period of the timeshare ownership. And that's something I know, Bob, seems evident, but when you're dealing with a lot of these products, they don't. There'll be a short-term lease. If you're selling 20 years of vacations, you've got to have product tied up for 20 years. You have to own that product. It can't be on the come, where you're going to do leases. And people always say, well, but the product's always available. There's plenty of inventory out there. Depending on what you're selling, that's probably not going to work. If you've been doing that for 30 years, maybe it works and you have a lower advance rate, but you've got to be able to control the product. And there's got to be protection for the ownership. One of the ways to do that is a trust. All the big timeshare lawyers, law firms know how to set up these trusts to protect the ownership so no one else can get at it. Because that's what we always fear, is that you're going to have a lender out there, they're going to foreclose on the property, and all those timeshare owners are gone. That's the biggest fear. And when you're structuring your product, you've got to make sure that doesn't happen. It could be a mortgage holder, it could be anybody, but nobody who has a problem with you can go in and take those timeshare owners' rights away. You need some type of non-disturbance.
I mean, and that's because it's true ownership. I mean, you're not buying air, you're buying real estate.
Well, in most cases, in these cases, you're not buying real estate. And while air is usually a derogatory term, it's more air than it is real estate. But that doesn't mean that, say selling air. Air is not a bad thing. What you're really selling is time. And time is a sort of an intangible. But if you have that time reserved legally and you control that time, that's okay. And that's where we've evolved. We've evolved from deeded properties where you know what you've got, to non-deeded where it's got to be protected in a different way. But it can be protected. And one thing we pride ourselves on at Colebrook is looking at things objectively, and not saying, well, we've always done it this way, so this is what we're always going to do. And now, Bob, you worked with a number of our customers. That's, so we've known each other for a long time. That's generally how we run into each other, is you're doing something for one of our customers. And if I can throw compliments, they usually tell us what a good job you've done.
Thank you.
We've recommended you to other people. And
thank you.
And we but those forms that you've seen are different. And if those customers are happy, it's because they've been able to access it, and because it's been structured in a way that it almost mirrors real estate. And as I was saying, one thing we pride ourselves on is looking at things that are unique, rather than saying this is the way we've always done it, this is the type of product we do. And we have an advantage, unfair advantage, because we're not a large institution. And what we came to, if I can back up and sort of tell you a little bit about our business, when we started this business 20 years ago, we realized the timeshare industry didn't need another broker. There were few enough businesses, lenders out there that everybody knew who they were. They didn't need a broker. What they really needed was a lender with more flexibility, with better rates than some of the expensive finance companies, and more flexibility than the big lenders. And that's the role we've filled. So we use our own funds, and we can make the decisions ourselves. We're not a big institution where you have that process in place. And I was in banking for a number of years, and I started in banking many years ago as a credit analyst. And it's amazed me how banks in response to regulation, increasing regulation, have turned over their business to the credit department. We find people who are, presidents of banks saying, well, the credit department won't let me do it. When I started out, when the president wanted to get something done, it got done. Whereas credit departments have incredible power these days. And they also have no bottom line responsibility. So they're not likely to go out on a limb or even, stray far from the trunk. And we can look at things differently. We can look at an ownership form and say yes. And we were the first to finance points back 15 years ago. And we've been leaders in financing different types of ownerships and really just sitting down and saying, well, never mind this. We've never seen this before. How does it work? Tell us what you're selling and tell us how the owner is protected.
And it doesn't matter how the product is purchased. In other words, it could be purchased directly from the developer. It could be purchased through a resale site. It could be, there are different ways to buy that product. So from your standpoint, it doesn't really matter how you bought it. These typical forms of ownership are going to apply.
Well, we stray a little here, but the resale financing is interesting because we've done a little bit of it. It's hard to do because the market's so fragmented. You've got all those resellers out there. But what makes resale paper much better, and we were doing this part-time 25, 30 years ago. We were trying to do resale financing, and we did some. It was terrific, had terrific performance, but just administratively, there's so many small players out there, we could never get it together. We now do it through someone else. And the difference between that is when you go and buy timeshare from a developer, you show up at the resort, generally got a gift. You're there to get the gift. You go through a 2-hour presentation or whatever it might be. You sign up right there and you leave. On the resale side, you generally seek out the purchase. You're online because you want to go to that resort. Maybe it's Disney, maybe it's Marriott, but you sought it out. Nobody came to you to get you to go to a presentation. The closing takes place over several weeks. So there's no buyer's remorse. If you have buyer's remorse, it takes place during that period and you don't buy. And these people also feel they've got a bargain because you're generally paying less on the resale market than you're paying if you buy from a developer. So you've got buyers who took their time. They were the ones who sought it out and they think they're getting a good deal. That paper performs much better than first line sale paper. So we digress there. And we were talking about the sales process.
Well, yeah, it was about it doesn't matter how you buy it. You're going to buy it in one of these forms, either deeded, non-deeded, whatever you're buying, you're going to buy it in one of these forms.
And someone's going to sell it.
Right.
And what's important is that when you have a vacation product that's very complex, where you can use 3 vacations this year, 2 next year, 3 if it's a leap year, and then if your unit is a studio instead of a 2-bedroom, then you can get extra point, 2 extra nights. When you have a very complex product, it's 1, difficult for the buyer to understand, and 2, easier for the salespeople to misrepresent it, either intentionally or unintentionally. If they're trying to sell a product, they're going to present it in the best way possible. Maybe they don't understand it themselves. You may have salespeople that aren't well trained, but if you have a misunderstanding, if the person doesn't buy what the developer thinks they sold, then you're going to have an unhappy consumer. And we see that. And people will call us occasionally just because they weren't getting any satisfaction from the developer. And invariably you find, I can't use it. It doesn't work for me. I thought it was going to be this, but it isn't. If your life changed, that's your problem. But so many times they told me I could use this. And if you're dealing with points, it comes down to, they didn't sell me enough points. I can't do what I want to do. And if you have, that's an unhappy consumer, and they're not going to pay most likely, and it's going to come back on the developer.
That's not always an easy product to use either. Even if you're going through an exchange company, it can get kind of complicated.
Yeah, can. And if we could flip to the next slide, Bob. And and some of these I've already covered, is that you've got to keep all this stuff in mind when you're structuring a product. Make sure it's financeable, set up a trust if you need to, make sure there's no debt in there, and match the terms with the use. And you say, well, a lot of these flexible products, you can accelerate the use. You buy, say, 20 vacations. Make sure they can't take those 20 vacations in the first 3 years if they got a 7-year note, because that is going to lead to some problems on the back end. You've got somebody who owes money and they've used up all their vacations. You don't want that to happen. And these little things you think about when you may not think about when you're structuring the product for the consumer. What does it mean in terms of everything else? One thing it has to do, of course, is be legal. And that trips up a lot of these creative projects. Is it's not legal. You can't sell that. You can't do that. So that's and matching the note terms with the use. If you've got a short-term product, have a short-term note. Don't have a long-term note. And again, you've got to have the product available for the entire time. Make sure that if whatever you are selling, you have. I was talking to somebody a few months ago, and they were doing that, having short-term leases, selling a long-term product, and they said, "Well, yeah, but it works really well." But most things work really well when you don't pay for your product. The economics tend to be really good. But then how do we know the developer is going to be there to sign those leases, pay those leases? Everything has to be taken care of in advance, done before. The product has to be delivered to the customer. And that's basically what you need to remember.
So, and this is for any developer. I mean, it's, we're, regardless of what stage they're in. I mean, it could be a new resort development, which of course there are few and far of those in between anyway, but it could be new, it could be old, it could be a refinance, it could be, I mean, anytime you're looking for money, these keys to financing are going to apply, correct?
But it is, and if you've been doing it for a long time, that gives you some credibility. In other words, I say these things as if they're hard and fast rules, but if you've been doing this for 20 or 30 years and you have a track record of performing, that's a lot different than someone coming to us saying, I have an idea. Startups are difficult. If you're a startup and you've got an idea that's way out of the box and you've never done it before and you don't have a lot of financial strength, that's a tough sell. What this creativity has allowed people to do is to get into the markets without a lot of capital. You see the brands and what people always used to do. You go back 20 years, you want to be in the timeshare business. Well, you acquire a condominium building, you build condominiums, and then you sell them. Now, so much of the people we see, the brands still do that, but most of the people we see are acquiring product that's been built by somebody else. It's excess inventory. They're getting inventory from RCI or II. They're getting inventory that already exists. Most of the new people are building something themselves.
Yeah. So one question that may be a little bit, excuse me, off the mark here too, and that is from just a straight up Colebrook financial business model. How has all of the consolidation impacted you? I mean, it has impacted us considerably, but some positive, some negative. I mean, we win some, we lose some. How's it doing for Colebrook? Because there's a lot of consolidation going on.
That's the biggest risk to our business model, and I say on both sides of the ball. And what's interesting about our business is I say we use our own capital, but we don't have it sitting in a vault. We borrow that money. We have 11 banks that we deal with. And so we borrow money and then we lend it. And on both sides of the ball, a consolidation is our biggest risk. A developer, we lose. That's the only time we ever lose customers is when they get acquired. And we hardly ever lose customers. We take great pride in our customer service. We retain our customers. Our typical model is we start out small. We get our foot in the door. We do a small transaction and then we expand. The only time we lose customers is they're sold. And you can get those calls and you hear the conversation. It's always a kind of a somber tone. We have some news and it's a difficult situation with them because they're cashing out, they're getting rich. but they're giving bad news to us. So they don't want to appear too happy, but you know,
Yeah,
but they are.
yeah,
And we're happy for them, but we're not happy for us. So that's how we lose customers. And on the bank side, that's how we lose banks. Our banks get acquired. Timeshare is an unusual financing vehicle, which is why companies like Colebrook exist, because you can't go into a typical bank and get a timeshare loan. So we do that, but we finance through banks because we've educated them. We were in banking. I was chief lending officer of a Connecticut bank, know a lot of bankers. Because we're ex-bankers, they have some trust in us that we know what we're doing. But it takes a lot to get a bank comfortable. And then somebody comes in, a big bank, and buys that little bank, and off we go. We have one bank that has gotten rid of us 3 times. They've been chasing us around, acquire the banks we deal with, tell us to take our business elsewhere. That's consolidation. You hit the nail on the head with that question. Consolidation is the biggest risk for us in both sides. The good news is, it's like when you deforest, the trees go down, but new trees come in their place. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of smaller companies, and they're the ones doing these creative products. They're the ones who are out there thinking about what a consumer needs, what needs to be done. And those are our customers, and we will work with them. And so we're a good fit for them, because if you go to a big lender, first of all, if you're small, they don't want to be bothered. But second off, it's different. They don't want to be bothered. We'll work with somebody. And one of the keys for us is, will that developer listen? Because if we think there's a problem with financing it, maybe they should go back and look at it. Maybe the product hasn't been structured as well as it should be structured, but some people don't want to do that. Here's what we're selling. You either finance it or you don't. But the customers who are our best customers are the ones who listen, and we listen to them, and we work together, and they'll point out something to us. Well, here's how we guard against this risk. But they also need to listen to our concerns as well. So we see a lot of the new developers, and we talk to a lot of them. A lot of them are selling some kind of vacation club, and you talk to a lot of people before you do one deal, because a lot are salespeople. And what we look for is, I say, is the difference between somebody who's a good salesperson and someone who can run a business. And that's what we try to figure out. And our best developers are the ones who can sell. They generally started on the line, but they're not just salespeople. They understand administration, they understand finance, and they have other people who do. They hire people and they listen to those people. And that's what we try to find out. Is this person just really good salesman, or are they really good at running a business?
Yeah, I've often said that the most powerful person at timeshare is the VP of sales, and because if the developer, the leadership in that group, if they're listening to what that salesperson is telling them, then they are fashioning their products accordingly. That gets to be more and more important today. You pointed out earlier that it's not only the millennials, but we're talking about grandma and grandpa that they want more flexibility in their travel plans too. So
yeah, and you could also say the VP of sales is the most dangerous person in the organization.
Can be.
If they don't understand anything other than sales, and you don't have that other support, what we'd like to see is balance in an organization. People who fit the mold. You want a salesperson who comes across well, who understands the market, who's aggressive, and then you want a finance person who understands the financials and has enough authority to put the brakes on some of the really bad ideas out there that may be great for sales, but not good for other things. And you want somebody who's good administratively, to take the back of the house and do all process the receivables, process the ownership, be able to manage the property. You like to see all those things. But people in the finance business tend to sometimes denigrate salespeople, but without sales, you don't have any customers. You have nothing to account for. You have nothing to manage. You have nothing at all. So you're right. Sales drives an organization, but it can't drive it unfettered.
I'll give you a good example. At the risk of sounding like I'm pitching my product, but even if it wasn't my product, we have a client that the HOA board decided that they didn't need 3 skillets in every unit. So they said, when a skillet runs out, pitch it, don't replace it. Well, after a while, their net promoter score started to drop. And as you probably know, Bill, the net promoter score is one of those scores that it's a revenue predictor. It's a loyalty score. it tells me whether or not so-and-so is going to pay their maintenance fees. Well, their net promoter score dropped, and they found out why their net promoter score dropped. So they started putting pots and pans, started to replenish those that they got rid of. Somebody in that organization was smart enough to be talking to the VP of sales and said, "Hey, guess what we found out in our surveys and our net promoter score? We actually now have 3 pots and pans, and guess what? That made a big difference." The sales guy was smart enough to incorporate that into their presentation and say, "By the way, ma'am, in every unit we have these 3 size skillets," and it actually improved their VPG. So you never know. It's those small things that sometimes salespeople can be good listeners also.
Yes, that's I would never have thought of that. So
yeah, and it's happened twice. I mean, there was another time when one of our clients replaced their countertop appliances with KitchenAid, and it made a big difference also. And so that net promoter score is the loyalty score. It's a big deal. So, Bill, as you probably know, I mean, because we've talked about it, every time I am fortunate enough and flattered enough to have a guest like you come on these Mobius Bobcasts, I like to feature your charity of choice. And one way that I feature them is not only to let you talk about it, but also I will contribute $50 when we're finished here to your charity of choice, which is the Middlesex United Way. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. I was on the board of the Middlesex United Way for a number of years. I was their campaign chair 1 year, so I know them very well. And Colebrook is a big supporter of them. We've gotten awards for our contributions. We like to go up every year, and everybody contributes. We're a small company, and we've got a lot of commitment. And my theory, everyone has their own personal theory of what they like to back, because every cause is a good one. I mean, everybody comes in with a cause, and they're all worthwhile causes. But to me, I have what I like to support, and then how it's done. I called my theory the barbell theory of charity. People on either ends of the age spectrum, children and the elderly, really people who can't help themselves, children especially. And I also am very conscious of how the money is used. Being a good steward for the money is far more important to me than having a good cause. Because people say, well, why donate to the United Way? They just donate to other agencies. You're just taking some out for overhead. But I've known the United Way very well, and they're right down the hall from us in the office, so we can keep an eye on them, and we just see them in the hallway. And one thing they've done when I was on the board was holding people accountable for results, which is very, very important to me, because the sort of the difficulty of charity is you go out, you raise money, you tell people the great things you're going to do, then you go out the next year and say the need is greater than ever. We need to raise more money, and the question is, well, what have you been doing with the money you got? It should be getting better, not worse. And I want to see things getting better, and that's one of the things the United Way has done, is hold their agencies accountable for getting results, getting real results, and treating causes, not just symptoms. And that's very important to me. Stewardship is more important than cause, and targeting, and really finding solutions. Getting to the bottom. That's why I like the idea of children.
How did you get involved with Middlesex in the first place?
Well, Kevin Wilhelm, who was executive director, recruited me when I was in banking, and I got to know a lot of the people there, and then really started to see what they did. And I said, to me, the big thing is stewardship of money. Making sure that it's well used. And if it's not, and one of the difficult things we had when I was on the board is, do you cut somebody off? And my thought is, you have to do that. I mean, if people are not using the money well, if it's they're not accounting for it, that was the biggest thing. People couldn't account for it. And I think if I donate money, I want to get the most bang for the buck we can out of that money. I think the United Way does a very good job of that. And it's local. It all goes here in the community. I grew up in Middletown. I like to contribute to local charities, not necessarily see it go national, because I say they're right down the hall from us. If I see somebody driving in a Porsche, I know that. And we have the conversations in the hallway, and about what they're doing and what they're working on, and that's important to me.
Well, you would prove to be a very, very, very valuable asset, not only in your ability to raise funds and pitch their the charity, but also you're a savvy business guy, and I'm sure you give them good guidance. Before we close this out, which we're about there, talk to me about baseball. I'm a Yankee fan, have been since I was a little kid. When I was growing up, it was Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, and Mickey Mantle, and that's why I became a Yankees fan. I should be a White Sox fan because I grew up in South Bend, Indiana. So, but you're very accomplished, right? I mean, you're one of those subject matter experts.
Well, in a group of non-experts, I'm an expert. I mean, you go to people who really know baseball history. I keep my mouth shut more often than not, but I've been a Yankee fan since 1962. And one of the things I did, I've written 10 books altogether, and several on baseball in the 1960s, some in baseball in the 19th century. But one of those books, Bob, and you might be interested in, is called The Yankees of the Early 60s. It's from the Yankees from 1960 through 1966. And what was really interesting for me is I interviewed, between that, I wrote a book on the Mets, about 140 former players for the Yankees and Mets. And these are guys that, I grew up watching, Tommy Tresh, Ralph Terry, I could go on and on, Johnny Blanchard, Phil Linz. And to talk to them about, say, the 62 World Series. Well, you remember that. Tom Tresh made a great catch in Game 7. Ralph Terry won Game 7. Ralph Terry gave up the game-winning home run in 1960 World Series. But to talk to these guys was really, really interesting. I talked to a lot of players that no one had talked to and told their stories. And, it's something I do in the evenings and weekends. And one of the best things, I've gotten to meet some really interesting people. Not just ex-players, but I wrote a book on minor league football in Connecticut, which I liked as a kid, and I just got to know a lot of the players, a lot of the people, and some very, very interesting people. If I digress here, there's someone you probably haven't heard of, but she was very famous in her day, named Pat Palinkas, who was the first woman to play professional football. In 1970, she was a holder for the Orlando Panthers. Her husband was a place kicker, and she was the holder. And in the first play, and she was, if you interview this woman, say, this is a gal who played professional football, just a tough, really, just outgoing, really lively, full of fire type of woman. Anyway, her first play, which got on national TV, she kneels down, her husband was about to kick, and she turned back, and as Walter Cronkite said in the CBS News, this is something you'll probably never hear on a football field again. She said, "You ready, honey?" And so the snap came back, and it turned out she wasn't ready. She was nervous. She fumbled the snap. And there was a linebacker for the Bridgeport Jets who they were playing against named Wally Florence. And Wally thought that it was a disgrace that a woman should be playing professional football. I'm out here making a living. This woman's out here making just a travesty of the game. And at the beginning, before the game, he told his teammates, "I'm going to knock her head off." And he almost did, because she fumbled the ball. She was trying to recover it. He came in and went helmet to helmet with her, sent her flying back. And I interviewed her and her husband simultaneously. And Steve, her husband, said, "It was pretty cool. If you see it on the replay, her head snapped right back." So anyway, she went down. She weighed like 120 pounds, and Wally was like 230. So she went down, and everybody thought she was dead. It turned out she was fine. She just popped up, went off the field, and that was her first appearance in football. She played 3 games as a holder and did fairly well after that. But interviewing Pat Palinkas was something that I not only included her in the book, but I wrote an article for a magazine about her. Just an interesting story. And I've just met so many interesting people like that. And one I wrote, my first non-sports book, which I wanted to do, said before I die, I want to do one non-sports, was called The 60s in the News, which was, the time you and I grew up, just writing about all kinds of things that happened in the 60s, a lot of them obscure, a lot of them just really fascinating to me. And that came out about a year ago. So
I think that's great. I know that one of George Will, the great conservative columnist, one of his big side hustles is baseball, and he's written several books also. And I've read a couple of them, and I'm going to have to take some time and pick up one or two of yours, and
okay.
And do the same. I assume they're available on Amazon.
Oh, they're all on Amazon, yeah. And you have the same publisher, all McFarland Company. So they're all available. You put my name in, you'll find them.
That's great. And then the other thing is, with any questions, of course, they want to just Google the Colebrook Group and check out your website, right? And hopefully do good business with Colebrook, because Colebrook will only do good business, I'm sure. And that's the reputation, by the way. I have to return the compliment, because that's what I hear from our clients that are doing business with you. They all say the same thing. You're easy to do business with, and you make a lot of sense. And so, with no nonsense. So that's always very, very valuable.
Well, one thing we always pride ourselves on, which sounds simple, but we answer the phone. We're easy to get a hold of. You email us, we'll respond. If you call us, we'll answer the phone. People are shocked when we actually answer, and it's one of the partners, but we do. So we encourage everybody to call us, and we'll give you a straight answer. If we think you're going down the wrong path, we'll tell you. We think you're in the right path, we'll tell you. And we try to give you a straight answer.
Yeah, we're the same, very much the same way. We answer the phone also, unless of course I'm doing one of these and I put the phone on do not disturb. But somebody here will always pick up the phone if we're here. So Bill Ryczek, I'm going to stop the recording now, and thank you very much for participating. I'm really grateful to have somebody with your pedigree. I mean, it's very flattering. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Bob. I appreciate the opportunity.